I secured a $3 million house on the oceanfront, and the instant my son-in-law found out, he called me abruptly and said, without asking anything, we're heading to you. There will be 20 of us. Get beds, towels, slippers. Food. Will be staying for 3 weeks. We'll be there in 50 minutes, so step it up, old man. I smiled and set a plan in motion. Can you imagine pouring every ounce of your soul, every hard-earned penny, into building a dream home, a sanctuary, a monument to a love lost? And then, the moment you finally move in, your son-in-law calls, demanding you prepare for 20 of his friends, telling you they're taking over for 3 weeks, and to hurry up, old man. What the hell would you do? Because I smiled, and I made a plan. The last promise I made to my wife, Carol, before she passed, was that I would build her dream house by the ocean. For 2 years after she was gone, I poured every ounce of my soul and every cent of my life savings into making it a reality. This $3 million home, sitting proudly on the La Jolla coastline, wasn't just property. It was a monument to a lifetime of love, a sanctuary of memory. But the moment my son-in-law, Damien, found out I had finally moved in, he called me with a list of demands. He thought he was claiming a free resort for him and his 20 friends. He had no idea he was declaring war on a 72-year-old engineer who designs his own battlefields. The phone rang just as the afternoon sun began to cast a golden glow across the living room. I was sitting in the leather armchair Carol had picked out, watching the waves rhythmically kiss the shore. The caller ID showed Damien's name, and an old, familiar weariness settled in my bones. I answered and put him on speaker, a habit I developed to keep my hands free. Listen up, old man, and listen good. His voice boomed from the small speaker, completely devoid of any greeting. We're on our way to you. There'll be about 20 of us. Get the beds ready, towels, slippers, and food. We're staying for 3 weeks. I remained silent, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the armrests. Each demand was a hammer blow against the peaceful quiet of my home. 20 people. 3 weeks. It wasn't a visit. It was an invasion. He wasn't finished. His tone was impatient, as if he was speaking to a slow-witted employee. We'll be there in 50 minutes, so hurry up, old man. That phrase, old man, was delivered with a special kind of condescending punch. It was meant to put me in my place. I looked around the room. It was as if Carol was right there with me. My gaze fell on the grand piano in the corner, where her sheet music still rested untouched. I saw the spot by the large glass doors where we used to dance on summer evenings, and the oil painting of a stormy sea that she had fallen in love with at a local art gallery. Every single object in this house was a chapter of our story, and Damien, the man who had married my daughter, Olivia, was about to storm in with his noisy, disrespectful friends and turn this sacred space into a frat house. The anger I expected didn't come. Instead, a chilling clarity settled over me. It was the same feeling I used to get on a construction site when I saw a critical flaw in the structural plans. A calm, focused resolve to correct the problem before the entire thing came crashing down. Damien, I said, my voice perfectly even, betraying none of the storm brewing inside me. Are you sure that's a good idea? A good idea? Of course it is, he scoffed loudly. It's a family house, isn't it? You're not just going to rattle around in that huge mansion all by yourself, are you? We're coming to liven the place up for you. A small, cold smile touched my lips. A smile he couldn't see. He was right about one thing. Things were about to get very lively, just not in the way he imagined. All right, Damien, I replied, my tone deceptively mild. Come on over. I'll get everything prepared. I ended the call before he could say another word. I didn't get up. I didn't shout. I just sat there, letting the silence of the house wash over me again. He didn't understand. To him, this house was just its monetary value, its square footage, its prime location. He didn't see the hours I'd spent with the architect, making sure the master bedroom window perfectly framed the sunrise, just as Carol had always wanted. He didn't see the garden where I had planted her favorite flowers, the white roses and lavender that now bloomed in her memory. He saw me not as his father-in-law, the man who walked his wife down the aisle, but as a groundskeeper, a concierge, an old man. For a moment, my heart ached for Olivia. She was a sweet girl, but she was weak, easily bulldozed by her husband's loud and aggressive personality. I knew she would be swept along in his wake, too timid to stand up to him, too afraid to defend her own father. But my love for her couldn't excuse this level of disrespect. Carol had taught me that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's permission to be mistreated. And Damien had just stepped over a boundary that was etched in stone. My mind, trained for a lifetime to see stress points and load-bearing walls, began to construct a blueprint. It was a plan for a lesson in respect built on a foundation of his own arrogance. I finally stood up, the stiffness in my joints replaced by a surge of cold purpose. I walked over to my desk, a solid oak piece where I had drafted countless designs. I didn't call Olivia to plead with her. I didn't call my lawyer to complain. I pulled up the contact list on my phone and dialed a number saved under Leo Management. The phone was answered on the first ring. Leo Management. How can I help you, Mr. Miller? The voice was crisp, efficient. Hello, Leo, I said, my voice steady and clear. I have a unique rental opportunity for you. High-end clientele. It requires absolute privacy. Short-term contract, 3 weeks, starting tomorrow morning. There was a brief, surprised pause on the other end. Tomorrow morning, Mr. Miller? That's quite sudden, but certainly manageable. However, my records show you were expecting family to visit. Leo was good at his job. That's why I paid his company their substantial fee. They were discreet, thorough, and always informed. There's been a change of plans, I stated simply. And these new clients have very strict requirements. They need a quiet, secure environment. I want professional security arranged for the property around the clock. And no one, absolutely no one who is not on the rental contract is to be allowed on the premises. That includes my relatives. Can you guarantee that? Absolutely, sir. We can have a bonded security team in place by sunup. Any rules stipulated in the contract will be enforced to the letter. Excellent, I said. I'll be sending over the renter's information and some additional clauses for the contract within the hour. I want everything signed, sealed, and legally binding before 8 a.m. tomorrow. Consider it done, Mr. Miller. We'll handle everything. I hung up the phone. The first move had been made. This wasn't a rash decision born of anger. It was the activation of a contingency plan. A break glass in case of emergency protocol I had designed with my lawyer months ago. A legal fortress I had built to protect Carol's legacy from the entitlement I saw growing in Damien's eyes. I sat down at my computer and began to compose the email to Leo. There was no feeling of triumph, no petty glee. There was only a profound sense of calm, the calm of an engineer who has double-checked his calculations and knows with absolute certainty that his structure will withstand the coming storm. Damien thought he was heading to a party. In reality, he was walking into a meticulously designed lesson. And class was about to begin. With the call to Leo finished, a 50-minute clock started ticking in my head. Damien was a storm on the horizon, fast approaching, and I had to batten down the hatches. I didn't rush. An engineer knows that haste leads to structural failure. Instead, I moved with a calm, deliberate economy of motion. A man with a blueprint and a deadline. My first stop was the living room mantelpiece, the heart of our home. Lined with silver frames, it told the story of our lives. I picked up the first one, a black and white photo from our wedding day. Carol was laughing, her head thrown back, a joy so pure it seemed to radiate from the faded image. For a fraction of a second, I could almost hear that laugh echoing in the silent room. I remembered her whispering to me at the altar, "You're stuck with me now, Robert Miller." I smiled. "Best predicament I've ever been in," I had whispered back. The memory was warm, but my hands were cold and methodical. I took a roll of bubble wrap and a packing box from the hall closet. Each photo was carefully wrapped and placed inside. Our honeymoon in Italy, Olivia's first steps on this very floor. The last Christmas, we had all been together before Carol got sick. Each frame contained a universe of love and history, and I was sealing each one away, placing them into hibernation, safe from the coming frost. Next, I moved to her piano. It was a beautiful baby grand, a gift I'd given her on our 20th anniversary. Her fingers had danced across these ivory keys for years, filling the house with music that was sometimes joyful, sometimes melancholic, but always full of life. I ran my hand over the smooth, polished wood. I could almost feel the phantom vibrations of the last piece she ever played, a simple, haunting melody by Debussy. She had been weak, but her touch on the keys was as certain as ever. She was saying goodbye. I gently lowered the fallboard, covering the keys. I locked it and draped a thick, plain canvas dust cover over the entire instrument. It looked stark now, a shrouded ghost in the corner of the room, its voice silenced, its spirit hidden. From there, I went to the built-in bookshelves that flanked the fireplace. They were filled with our shared library. I didn't pack every book. That would be impractical and unnecessary. My mission wasn't to empty the house. It was to remove its soul. I scanned the shelves, my eyes finding the worn spines of our favorites. I pulled out a collection of Robert Frost poems. Tucked inside the front cover was a note written in Carol's elegant script. "My dearest Robert," it read, "thank you for taking the road less traveled by. It has made all the difference. All my love, C." I closed the book. The ache in my chest, a familiar friend. I packed that book and a dozen others like it. The ones with inscriptions, the ones we read aloud to each other on rainy nights. In their place, I left behind the generic hardcovers, the ones people buy for decoration. The shelves still looked full, but now they were just furniture. With 3 boxes now filled with the most potent pieces of our life, I carried them one by one down to the basement. At the far end of the finished space, behind a plain wooden door, was my sanctum sanctorum. I punched a 7-digit code into a keypad, and a series of heavy deadbolts retracted with a satisfying clunk. I pulled open the heavy, insulated steel door. This was my vault. I designed and built it myself when we first constructed the house. I remember the conversation with Carol vividly. We were standing on the empty plot of land, the ocean breeze whipping her hair across her face. "It's beautiful, Robert, but it's so close to the water," she'd said. A flicker of worry in her eyes. "What about the storms? What about a flood? All our pictures, my mother's jewelry, everything could be washed away." She was right. An engineer deals in probabilities, and living on the coast meant the probability of a major storm was never 0. So, I over-engineered a solution: a 10 by 10 foot room with reinforced concrete walls, a dedicated climate control system to fight humidity, and a door that could withstand a Category 5 hurricane. "It's a storm cellar for our hearts," she had called it, her eyes shining with relief and love. The irony was not lost on me now. I had built this vault to protect our memories from a storm of wind and water. Now I was using it to protect them from a storm of arrogance and disrespect. A storm that was, in a way, family. I placed the boxes neatly on a metal shelf inside, next to Carol's jewelry box and a few other heirlooms. I took one last look and closed the heavy door, the deadbolt sliding home with a sound of finality. Carol was safe. My work wasn't done. I went upstairs to the master bedroom. I stripped our bed of the beautiful quilt Carol had spent a year making. In its place, I put a plain, thin white comforter. I did the same for the guest rooms, replacing the warm, welcoming bedding with sterile, hotel-grade linens. I went into the bathrooms, removing the plush, color-coordinated towels and the lavender-scented soaps Carol loved. I replaced them with stacks of cheap, scratchy white towels and generic bars of soap still in their paper wrappers. I worked without stopping, my actions precise and efficient. The house was being transformed. It was being neutralized. The warmth was being systematically extracted, leaving behind a clean, functional, but utterly cold shell. It was becoming a house, but it was no longer a home. I finished my work and stood in the center of the living room. The clock on the wall showed that 48 minutes had passed. I looked around. The photos were gone. The piano was shrouded. The warmth had been locked away in the basement. The stage was set. It was a perfect imitation of a luxury rental property, devoid of personality or history. It was a beautiful body without a soul. Just then I heard it, the low rumble of multiple engines turning onto my long gravel driveway. They were here. The storm had arrived, and I, the engineer, stood calmly in the quiet eye of my own creation, perfectly prepared. My work inside the house was far from over. Before Damien's arrival, there was one more critical piece of the plan to confirm. At precisely 3 o'clock, a sleek, dark sedan pulled into my driveway. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor stepped out. This was Evelyn Reed, my lawyer for the past 15 years. I had called her right after my conversation with Leo. She didn't come to my house to offer condolences or to talk about the weather. She came here to review the final details of a war I was about to wage. I led her into my study where a thick binder of documents was already laid out on my polished oak desk. She gave me a knowing look, a mixture of professional sympathy and steely resolve. "Robert," she began, her voice calm and measured, "are you certain you want to proceed with this? Once we set this in motion, there's no turning back." I met her gaze without flinching. "He called me old man, Evelyn, and he's bringing an army to desecrate my wife's home. There is nothing left to consider." Evelyn nodded, her expression shifting from concern to pure business. She sat down opposite me and opened the binder. "Very well," she said. "Let's review the structure one last time, just to ensure there are no vulnerabilities." She pointed to the first page, the title of which read, "The Carroll Miller Family Trust." "As we established 2 years ago," she began, her voice taking on the precise cadence of a legal expert, "this $3 million property is not owned by you, Robert Miller, the individual. It is owned by this trust. You are the sole trustee. This is the most important legal fact in our arsenal." I nodded. It had been my idea, a way to protect the house from unforeseen liabilities. But Evelyn had been the one to craft it into an ironclad fortress. "As the trustee," she continued, "you have what is called a fiduciary duty. Your legal obligation is to act in the best interest of the trust's assets. That means protecting their value and, where appropriate, making them profitable. Hosting a 3-week, non-paying party for 30 people who are likely to cause damage is a clear violation of that fiduciary duty. You would be, in legal terms, mismanaging the trust's primary asset." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Conversely," she added, "renting the property to a vetted, high-paying client for $120,000 is a perfect example of fulfilling your fiduciary duty. Any court in the country would see this as a responsible, prudent decision by a trustee. The legal justification was perfect. I wasn't just kicking my son-in-law out. I was fulfilling my legal obligation. It was impersonal, professional, and unassailable." "Turn to the page in the binder about occupancy rights," I asked, though I already knew the answer. I just needed to hear it again, to feel the solid ground of my plan beneath my feet. Evelyn's lips curved into a faint, satisfied smile. Yes, the masterstroke." She tapped a paragraph highlighted in yellow. "This clause grants the beneficiaries, in this case, your daughter Olivia, certain rights, including the right to use and occupy the residence, subject to your approval as trustee." My finger traced the words. "And you are concerned that Damien's lawyer, should he ever hire a competent one, might argue that this clause gives them a right to be here, even without a rental agreement?" "Exactly," I confirmed. "So, let's talk about the supplementary agreement." Evelyn reached into her leather briefcase and produced a separate, much thinner folder. She opened it to reveal a single document. "This," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "is the document Olivia signed 2 years ago. The Gifted Funds and Asset Protection Agreement." I stared at it. I remembered that day perfectly. Olivia and Damien had been so excited. I had just given them a cashier's check for $250,000 for the down payment on their first house. They were so grateful, so full of promises about how they would take care of me in my old age. As part of the transaction, and as a condition of my co-signing their mortgage, Evelyn had drafted this standard agreement. It seemed like a simple formality. "The agreement states," Evelyn read aloud, "that in consideration for the significant financial gift and the liability taken on by the co-signer, the beneficiary, Olivia Miller, voluntarily waives any and all future claims to use and occupancy rights of the co-signer's primary residence." It's designed to prevent exactly the situation, a child taking a parent's money and then also claiming a right to their home as if it were a common family asset. It was a legal checkmate. Damien and Olivia had been so blinded by the $250,000 check that they had signed away their rights without a second thought. They had sold their key to this house for the key to their own. They just didn't know it. I leaned back in my chair, a wave of sadness washing over me for a moment. "Carol would be heartbroken," I said quietly. "She never wanted to see the family divided like this." Evelyn's expression softened. Carol was a wonderful woman, Robert, but she was not a fool. She knew Damien's character. She would not want to see her legacy of love and peace be twisted into a license for disrespect. She would want you to protect this home, to protect your peace. This isn't about dividing the family. It's about teaching one member of it that actions have consequences. She was right. This wasn't an act of aggression. It was an act of preservation. I was defending the border of my life, a border Carol and I had built together. Evelyn closed the folders. I have certified copies of everything. The trust documents, the signed waiver, and a draft of the cease and desist letter. I will be on standby. Just give me the word, and I will be here within 30 minutes. I stood up and shook her hand. Thank you, Evelyn, for everything. She gave my hand a firm squeeze. Protect yourself, Robert. As I watched her car pull away, I felt a sense of grim finality. The legal trap was set. Every spring was coiled. Every gear was in place. All that was left was for the mouse to take the bait. Just as I was about to put my phone away, it buzzed in my hand. It was Olivia, my daughter. My heart gave a small, painful lurch. A part of me, the father in me, had been hoping she would call, that she would have the strength and the decency to apologize for her husband's behavior. This was her chance, a final off-ramp before the collision I had so carefully engineered. I took a deep breath and answered, keeping my voice neutral. Hello, Olivia. There was a cacophony of loud voices and music in the background on her end. I could hear Damien shouting something to one of his friends. Dad, hi! Her voice was strained, artificially bright. We're almost there. Can you believe it? The traffic was crazy, but we're just about 10 minutes out. Isn't this exciting? Exciting was not the word I would have chosen. Invasive, presumptuous, disrespectful. All of those came to mind. I'm aware of your estimated time of arrival, Olivia, I said calmly. There was a brief, awkward silence on her end. Oh, okay. Well, I just wanted to, call ahead. She was fumbling for words, and I knew why. She felt guilty. Good. Guilt was the seat of conscience. The question was whether she would allow it to grow. Listen, Dad, she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper as if she didn't want Damien to overhear. I'm sorry about Damien. He gets a little over the top when he's excited. He's just really looking forward to this trip, to showing his friends the new house. She was making excuses for him, as she always did, smoothing things over, avoiding the conflict, pretending his arrogance was just boyish enthusiasm. I remembered when she was 12 years old. A boy in her class had been bullying a smaller kid, and Olivia, all 4 feet, 10 inches of her, had stepped right in between them and told the bully to back off. She had a spine back then. I wondered what had happened to it. I suspected it had been slowly eroded away by years of placating a man like Damien. It's not about excitement, Olivia, I said, my voice soft but firm. It's about respect. This is my home. It is your mother's home. I let the words hang in the air. I had given her an opening, a chance to agree, to say, I know, Dad, and I'll talk to him. It was a lifeline I was extending across a growing chasm. She didn't take it. Instead, I heard her sigh, a sound of pure exasperation, as if I were the one being difficult. Oh my God, Dad, fine. Rules, whatever. We'll be on our best behavior, okay? Gosh, I have to go. Damien is calling me. We're pulling up now. See you in a minute. And with that, she hung up. She didn't say, I love you. She didn't say, I understand. She said, whatever. That one word was the sound of a door slamming shut. It was the sound of her making her choice. And it wasn't me. I placed the phone down on the counter. The tiny flicker of hope I hadn't even realized was there had been extinguished. I felt a strange sense of peace. The sadness was still there, a dull ache for the strong little girl my daughter used to be. But the guilt, the hesitation was gone. I had given her a warning. I had offered her a way out. She had not only ignored it, she had dismissed it with a flippant, disrespectful whatever. She had made her bed. Now all that was left was for her and her husband to lie in it. And I, the old man, the engineer, had designed that bed with meticulous, unforgiving precision. The doorbell rang, a sharp, demanding chime that echoed through the now silent house. The storm had made landfall. I stood in the foyer as the doorbell chimed again. This time, a long, impatient press. Before I could even move, The front door swung open with a force that made it bang against the interior wall, leaving a small, crescent-shaped dent in the plaster. And there stood Damien, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. He wasn't holding a suitcase. He was holding a large red cooler. He grinned a wide, predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. "All right, old man. The party's here," he boomed, his voice echoing in the high-ceiling space. He strode in without wiping his feet, clapping me hard on the shoulder as he passed, a gesture that was less friendly and more of a claim of ownership. "Hope you're ready for us. Where's the best place to set up the bar?" Behind him, a tidal wave of bodies began to pour into my home. It wasn't 20 people. My quick, practiced engineers, I did a rough head count. It was closer to 30, a chaotic mix of young men and women, all loud, all laughing, all carrying bags and cases of beer, as if they were arriving at a rented beach house for spring break. The delicate coastal quiet I cherished was shattered instantly, replaced by a cacophony of shouting, whooping, and the thumping bass of a portable speaker someone immediately placed on my handcrafted entryway table. One of the men, wearing a backwards baseball cap, let out a low whistle. "Damn, Damien!" he shouted over the noise. "You weren't kidding. Your father-in-law is loaded. This place is sick." Damien just laughed, a proud, possessive sound. "Told you, man. Welcome to my summer home." My summer home, the words hung in the air, a thick, greasy slick of entitlement. I didn't say a word. I simply stood there, a statue of calm in the swirling river of chaos. I watched as they dropped their duffel bags unceremoniously on the polished hardwood floors, the zipper scratching the surface I had so carefully maintained. One young woman immediately flopped onto the white linen sofa, propping her sandy flip-flops up on the custom-made coffee table. Another group made a beeline for the kitchen, yanking open the refrigerator without a moment's hesitation. "Score! He's got beer!" someone yelled, followed by the hiss of multiple cans being cracked open. They were not guests. They were invaders. They were behaving like locusts, descending upon a field, consuming everything in their path with a mindless, voracious energy. I saw Olivia trailing in at the back of the pack. She looked small and overwhelmed, a nervous, apologetic smile plastered on her face. Her eyes met mine for a brief second, and I saw a flicker of shame. "Dad," she started, but her voice was drowned out by Damien bellowing from the living room. "Liv, babe, come check out this view." She gave me a helpless shrug and scurried away to join her husband, a ghost trailing in the wake of a hurricane. Her apology, unspoken and unfinished, evaporated into the noisy air. I wasn't angry at her. I was disappointed. She was a willing participant in the desecration of her own childhood memories. My role in all of this was simply to be an observer. I was a scientist watching a colony of ants, noting their behavior, their patterns, their complete disregard for the structure they had infested. When Damien strode up to me and asked where the best bedrooms were, I simply gestured vaguely towards the staircase. I watched as his friends swarmed up the stairs, their loud footsteps echoing through the house. There were shouts of, "I call this one," and "Dude, look at this bathroom." They were claiming rooms like conquerors, planting flags on newly seized territory. My home, my sanctuary, was being carved up and distributed amongst a mob of strangers. Damien himself reappeared at the top of the stairs a few minutes later, a triumphant look on his face. "Hey, old man," he yelled down to me. "I'm taking the master bedroom. That view is insane. Hope you don't mind." He didn't wait for an answer. He disappeared back into the room that had been mine and Carol's, the room where she had spent her final, peaceful days looking out at the ocean she loved. He was sleeping in her bed. The thought didn't trigger a hot flash of rage. Instead, it was like a final, heavy piece of steel locking into place in the structure of my resolve. Every act of disrespect, every shouted word, every piece of carelessly discarded trash was another rivet, another weld, making my plans stronger and more absolute. They were not just damaging my property. They were erasing the memory of my wife with their loud, selfish existence. I stood there, amidst the growing chaos, and felt nothing but the cold, hard certainty of a blueprint about to be executed. They thought they had captured the castle. They had no idea they were in a cage of their own making. And I, the quiet old man in the corner, was about to turn the key. The first sign that their occupation was not going to be the luxurious vacation they had envisioned began to appear that evening. After they had claimed their rooms and cracked open their third or fourth beers, Damien decided it was time for music. He swaggered over to the state-of-the-art integrated sound system I had installed, a system that could make the entire house vibrate with crystal-clear audio. I had watched him brag about it to his friends. "Wait till you hear this thing," he'd said with a smug grin. Old man went all out. He tapped at the wall-mounted control panel, his brow furrowed in concentration. Nothing happened. He tried again. Silence. One of his friends, a lanky kid with a sarcastic smirk, chimed in. "Having trouble there, D? Maybe you need to call tech support." Damien's jaw tightened. "Shut up, man! It's probably just a setting." He spent the next 20 minutes trying to connect his phone via Bluetooth, then via Wi-Fi, then trying to log into a streaming service. The system, which I had spent a mere 5 minutes reconfiguring before they arrived, refused to cooperate. It recognized the network, but it wouldn't connect. It saw his phone, but rejected the pairing. It was a masterclass in technological frustration. Finally, he gave up, disgusted, and they were forced to rely on the tiny, bass-heavy sound from the portable speaker they brought. The magnificent $5,000 sound system remained stubbornly silent, a monument to their incompetence. Damien shot a dark look in my direction. I was sitting in my armchair, reading a well-worn paperback. I simply looked up, gave him a helpless shrug, and said, "Oh, that newfangled thing. I never can get it to work right. Too many buttons for an old man like me." The next challenge was the Wi-Fi. In an age of constant connectivity, a slow internet connection is a form of torture. I had logged into the main router's administrative panel and throttled the bandwidth down to a crawl. It wasn't off. It was just agonizingly slow. The signal was strong, 5 bars everywhere in the house, which only added to their confusion. But trying to load a video was impossible. Streaming a movie on the giant 8K television was a laughable fantasy. Even scrolling through social media was a buffering nightmare. I watched them, a pack of digital natives suddenly cast into the technological dark ages, their faces illuminated by the pale, frustrated glow of their phone screens. They were like children who had been given a complex toy with no instructions and dead batteries. The beautiful house was their prison, a gilded cage with terrible reception. The grumbling grew louder. That night, the house has 6 full bathrooms, and the line for showers was long, but the line moved faster than expected for a simple reason. I had walked down to the basement earlier and turned the thermostat on the massive 80-gallon water heater down to its lowest setting. It wasn't cold, but it was lukewarm, and after the first 4 or 5 showers, it became decidedly cool. I heard yelps of surprise and frustration echoing from the upstairs bathrooms. "Dude, is there any hot water in this place?" someone yelled. Damien, who had been trying to untangle an HDMI cable to connect a video game console to the stubbornly uncooperative smart TV, threw his hands up in the air. "How should I know? Maybe the old man is trying to save a few bucks on his gas bill." The morning brought a fresh wave of misery for the hungover horde. Hangovers crave 2 things, coffee and grease. I had ensured both were difficult to obtain. The gourmet Italian espresso machine, a beautiful chrome beast that could produce a perfect cappuccino, was flashing a small, insistent red light. The display read in crisp digital letters, "Descal cycle required." Without the proper cleaning solution, which I had conveniently hidden, the machine refused to do anything. I had, however, left out a small, cheap drip coffee maker and a can of generic coffee. The disappointment on their faces as they sipped the bitter, watery brew was a small, quiet victory. The high-tech induction stove in the kitchen was similarly uncooperative, its touch controls refusing to respond to their greasy fingers. Through all of this, I remained a placid, unbothered island of tranquility. While they struggled with the coffee machine, I was on the patio, drinking a simple cup of tea I had brewed on a small hot plate. While they cursed at the buffering symbols on their phones, I was reading my book, turning the physical pages with a quiet rustle. My analog piece was a stark, deliberate contrast to their digital hell. Every time one of them approached me with a new complaint, I would offer a look of grandfatherly confusion and some useless advice. "The Wi-Fi. Oh dear, did you try turning it off and on again?" I'd say. "The stove? Sometimes you have to have just the right pan on it. It's very particular. My feigned helplessness was my shield and my sword. I was the ghost in the machine, the subtle saboteur whose work was invisible, but whose effects were maddeningly present. Damien's frustration was a pressure cooker, and I was just gently turning up the heat. He was the host of this grand party, but he couldn't deliver any of the promised luxuries. His friends had started to tease him, their jokes laced with a growing edge of genuine annoyance. "Some palace you got us, D," one of them said as he gnawed on a piece of burnt toast. "I had better Wi-Fi at my dorm." Damien's face flushed with a dark, angry red. His ego, the most fragile thing about him, was taking a beating. The house was supposed to be his trophy, a symbol of his power and influence. Instead, it was making him look like a fool. He stood up from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He needed to reassert his dominance. He needed to find something, anything in this cursed house that he could control. And as he began to storm through the living room, his angry eyes scanning for a new target, I knew that the final, critical mistake was not far away. The breaking point didn't come with a roar, but with a crack. By late morning, the house was filled with a restless, irritable energy. Boredom and cheap beer had become a toxic combination. A few of Damien's friends, including the sarcastic one with the baseball cap, had started tossing a foam football back and forth in the living room, their lazy passes getting more and more reckless. Olivia had weakly protested. "Guys, maybe not in here." But she was ignored, her voice a feather in a hurricane. I was standing by the large window overlooking the ocean, pretending to watch the gulls, but in reality, I was observing everything in the reflection on the glass. The football sailed in a high arc, the thrower overshooting his target. The other man lunged for it, missed, and the ball bounced off his fingertips, careening directly toward the fireplace mantel. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The foam ball, soft as it was, had just enough mass to clip the edge of a small ceramic statue I kept in the center of the mantelpiece. It wasn't a valuable antique. It held no monetary worth whatsoever. But it was the most priceless object in the entire house. It teetered there for a single agonizing second, a tiny, lopsided bird poised for a flight it could not survive. And then it fell. The sound of it shattering on the stone hearth was not loud, but it was sharp, a definitive crack that sliced through the noise of the house and plunged the room into a sudden, shocked silence. The laughter died in their throats. All eyes were on the colorful shards scattered across the hearth. The young man who had thrown the ball looked pale, his mouth hanging open in a stupid, silent O. He knew, on some primitive level, that he had broken something more than a simple decoration. That statue. It was the first and only piece of pottery my Carol had ever made. I remember the day she brought it home from the community art class she joined on a whim. Her hands were covered in dried clay, her face smudged, but her eyes were shining with the pure, unadulterated pride of a child. "It's a bit lopsided, isn't it?" she had laughed. And the glaze ran. "But I made it, Robert, with my own 2 hands." It was beautifully imperfect, a physical manifestation of her spirit, of her willingness to try something new late in life. It was a piece of her joy I could hold in my hands. As I turned from the window, the silence in the room stretched thick and heavy with guilt. Everyone looked at me, then at Damien, their self-appointed leader, waiting for him to fix this. This was his moment, a moment for a real man to step up, to take responsibility, to offer a sincere, heartfelt apology, a moment to show a flicker of human decency. Damien, of course, did none of those things. To do so would be to admit a loss of control in front of his friends. His ego wouldn't allow it. He broke the silence, not with an apology, but with a loud, jarring laugh. It was a sound of pure dismissal. He swaggered over to the fireplace, nudging one of the larger blue shards with the toe of his expensive sneaker. He looked at me, a condescending smirk playing on his lips, and he spoke the 7 words that sealed his fate. "Oh, come on. It's just a piece of clay, old man." He let out another chuckle, trying to turn the tense situation into a joke. "Chill out. I'll buy you 10 of them." And that was it. The switch inside my soul, the one that toggled between forbearance and action, was flipped. He hadn't just allowed his friend to break a piece of pottery. He had, with his words, deliberately and cruelly shattered the memory it contained. He had looked at a piece of my wife's soul, a piece of her effort and her joy, and declared it worthless. He had called it just a piece of clay. In that moment, he wasn't just my arrogant son-in-law. He was a vandal who had defaced a holy place. I didn't shout. I didn't rage. I didn't even speak. I simply looked at him. My face, I imagine, was completely devoid of emotion. A blank slate, the calm of the abyss. I held his gaze for a long, silent moment, and I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes for the first time. He had expected me to yell, to be the hysterical old man. My utter stillness was something he didn't understand, and it scared him. Then I turned my back on him, on all of them, and walked slowly and deliberately toward my study. "Hey!" Damien called after me, his voice suddenly laced with a nervous uncertainty. "Hey, where are you going? Don't be so dramatic." I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I closed the study door behind me with a soft, final click. The period of observation was over. The time for consequences had begun. I went to bed that night, but I did not sleep. I simply lay in the guest room, listening to the cacophony of my home being violated. The party finally died down in the early hours of the morning, replaced by the sounds of drunken snoring from multiple rooms. When the sun rose, I was already up, showered and dressed. I sat on the back patio with a cup of tea, watching the waves and waiting. The house behind me was a disaster zone, a graveyard of the previous night's debauchery. The living room was littered with a dozen empty pizza boxes, and red plastic cups were scattered everywhere, some still containing a nauseating mixture of beer and cigarette butts. A sticky puddle of something was drying on the hardwood floor near the kitchen, and a single, sad-looking sock lay abandoned on a lampshade. The first of Damien's friends shambled out of a bedroom around 9 o'clock, a blurry-eyed young man wearing nothing but wrinkled basketball shorts. He grunted, scratched his stomach, and made his way toward the kitchen, presumably in search of water. But he stopped dead in the entryway, his mouth falling slightly ajar. He blinked several times as if trying to clear a particularly stubborn, hangover-induced fog from his brain. Standing serenely in the middle of the chaotic living room were 4 people who did not belong: a man, a woman, and 2 children, all impeccably dressed. The man, who I knew to be Mr. Tanaka, wore crisp linen trousers and a perfectly ironed white shirt. His wife wore an elegant, flowing sundress, and their 2 children, a boy and a girl, stood quietly by their side, looking as if they had just stepped out of a high-end clothing catalog. Next to them stood Leo, my property manager, in a sharp navy suit, holding a leather-bound portfolio. It was as if a page from a minimalist design magazine had been dropped into the middle of a landfill. The contrast was so extreme, so jarring, it felt completely surreal. The Tanaka family surveyed the scene of destruction, not with disgust or anger, but with a look of calm, detached neutrality. Mr. Tanaka's eyes swept over the mountains of trash, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Tanaka noticed Damien's bewildered friend staring at them. She offered him a small, polite smile and a slight, graceful bow of her head. The gesture was so out of place in the squalor of the room that it seemed to break the young man's brain. He just stared, unable to process what was happening. Slowly, more of the hungover horde began to emerge from the bedrooms, drawn by the unusual quiet. Each one had the same reaction. They would appear, see the mess, see the silent, elegant family standing in the middle of it, and just stop, utterly confused. The usual morning grumbling was replaced by hushed, frantic whispers. "Who the hell are they? Is this like the old man's family? Why are they dressed like that?" The atmosphere in the room grew thick with unspoken questions and a bizarre, silent tension. The partygoers who had acted with such boisterous ownership just hours before now seemed like what they were: unwelcome intruders. They huddled together in small, confused groups, their bravado completely gone. The Tanakas, meanwhile, paid them almost no mind. Guided by Leo, they began a slow, deliberate tour of the main floor. They spoke to each other in quiet, fluent Japanese, their voices a soft murmur against the backdrop of stunned silence. Mr. Tanaka paused by the large windows, nodding in appreciation at the view. Mrs. Tanaka ran a delicate hand over the marble countertop in the kitchen, carefully avoiding a sticky patch of spilled soda. Their politeness was a weapon so foreign to this environment that it was completely disarming. They weren't just guests. They were observers, assessors, and their very presence was a judgment on the chaos surrounding them. The strange standoff lasted for another 10 minutes before the king of this squalid castle finally made his appearance. Damien came down the stairs, yawning and stretching, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He clearly expected to be greeted by the adoring cheers of his friends. Instead, he was met with a room full of tense, confused faces, all staring at the strangers by the kitchen. He followed their gaze, and his face instantly transformed from smugness to pure, aggressive rage. His eyes narrowed, and he stomped the rest of the way down the stairs, placing himself directly in the path of Leo and the Tanakas. He puffed out his chest, the picture of violated masculinity. The surreal quiet was about to be shattered. "Who the hell are you people?" He snarled, his voice a low, threatening growl. "And what are you doing in my father-in-law's house?" Damien's voice, raw and aggressive, echoed in the suddenly silent room. "Who the hell are you people? And what are you doing in my father-in-law's house?" His friends, who had been huddled in confused groups, seemed to rally behind his aggression. He was their leader, reasserting his dominance. Mr. Tanaka did not flinch. His expression remained one of serene neutrality. Before I could speak, Leo took a deliberate step forward, placing himself between Damien and the Tanaka family. He moved with an unhurried, professional grace that made Damien's puffed-up posturing look childish. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," Leo said, his voice perfectly modulated, calm and clear. "My name is Leo from Leo Management, and this is Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka and their children." He gestured gracefully toward the family. Damien scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I don't care who you are. I asked what you're doing here. This is a private family vacation, so I suggest you take your little tour group and get out." Leo's expression did not change. He was the very picture of professional composure. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "This isn't a tour. Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka are the new short-term tenants of this property." The word tenants hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. For a moment, Damien just stared, his brain struggling to process the information. Then he threw his head back and laughed, a loud, forced sound meant to show his friends he was in control. "Tenants? You're kidding me, right? Tenants? This is my family's house, you idiot. The old man invited us here himself." He jabbed a thumb in my direction. "So, take your fake paperwork and your fake family and get the hell out of here before I call the cops." Leo didn't even blink. He simply opened the leather portfolio he was holding. "The paperwork, I assure you, is very real, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice still infuriatingly calm. He produced a multi-page document with a formal cover sheet. "This is a legally binding rental agreement, signed and executed this morning. The Tanaka family has rented this property for a period of 3 weeks for an agreed-upon sum of $120,000. The number hit the room like a physical blow. $120,000. The whispers among Damien's friends started immediately. The entire dynamic shifted. This wasn't some silly misunderstanding anymore. It was serious. Damien's face went from red to a deep, mottled purple. The laughter was gone, replaced by a look of furious disbelief. He finally turned his full attention to me. "You," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You did this. So you're trying to kick us out for them after you invited us." This was my cue. I had let Leo, the professional, lay the groundwork. Now it was time for me, the father-in-law, the engineer, to complete the demolition. I took a slow step forward, my calm a stark contrast to his explosive fury. "I'm not kicking you out, Damien," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying across the room. "Because you were never truly invited to stay. You invited yourselves. And more importantly, you made a critical error in your assumptions." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "You see," I continued, "you seem to be under the impression that this is my house." A wave of confusion washed over his face. "Of course, it's your house. What kind of stupid game are you playing?" "It's no game," I said. "Legally, this property is not owned by me, Robert Miller, the individual. It is owned by a legal entity. It is the primary asset of the Carroll Miller Family Trust." The words, formal and clinical, were like a foreign language to him. Fiduciary duty, trustee, asset, It was a battlefield he didn't know how to fight on. "Your mother's trust," Olivia whispered from the side of the room, her face pale. "Yes," I said, looking at my daughter for the first time. "A trust one established in her name to protect her legacy. And as the sole trustee, I have a fiduciary duty, a legal obligation, to protect the assets of that trust, to manage them responsibly." I let my gaze drift over the trashed living room, the empty beer cans, the discarded pizza boxes. Hosting a 3-week party for 30 people, free of charge, with the high potential for property damage, is not responsible management, Damien. It is, in fact, legally negligent. I then looked toward the composed figures of the Tanaka family. Leasing the property for $120,000, however, is a very prudent and responsible act of management. It is my duty. The ground had completely vanished from under Damien's feet. He was a bull who had charged, only to find himself in the middle of a deep, endless ocean. His usual tactics, bullying, shouting, physical intimidation, were useless against the cold, hard logic of the law. He sputtered, searching for a handhold. "This is insane. You can't do this. This is a family matter." He finally fell back on his last resort. He turned to his wife, his voice a desperate plea. "Olivia, tell him. Tell your father he's gone crazy. He can't throw his own daughter out on the street." The power in the room didn't just shift. It shattered and reformed in an instant. Damien, the conquering hero, was now a sputtering, cornered child, pleading for his wife to fight a battle he had already lost. Everyone in the room, his friends, the Tanakas, Leo, all turned to look at my pale, trembling daughter. The choice was now hers. All eyes in the room fell upon my daughter. Olivia stood frozen, a deer caught in the headlights, trapped between the furious demands of her husband and the quiet, unyielding presence of her father. Damien, desperate and cornered, saw her as his only remaining weapon. "Live, for God's sake! Do something!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "It's your house, too. Tell him he can't do this to us." Olivia looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a dawning, horrified understanding. Her mouth opened, but before she could utter a single word, a new voice, crisp and confident, cut through the tense air. "Actually, she can't." The voice came from the front doorway. Standing there, as if she had materialized out of thin air, was Evelyn Reed. She was the picture of corporate power, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, her leather briefcase held firmly in one hand. She exuded an aura of calm authority that instantly commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Her arrival was the final piece of my plan, the checkmate I had held in reserve. Leo gave her a subtle, professional nod. He had clearly called her the moment things had begun to escalate, just as we had arranged. Evelyn walked into the living room, her heels clicking purposefully on the hardwood floor. She didn't look at the mess. She didn't look at Damien's friends. Her sharp, intelligent gaze was fixed solely on Damien and Olivia. "I apologize for the intrusion," she said, though her tone suggested she was not sorry at all. "My name is Evelyn Reed. I am the legal counsel for the Carroll Miller Family Trust." Damien stared at her, dumbfounded. "Another one? What is this? Some kind of legal ambush?" Evelyn ignored him, turning her attention to Olivia. Her voice softened slightly, but it retained a core of unyielding steel. "Olivia," she said, "your husband seems to be under the impression that you have a legal right to be in this house. He is mistaken, and I believe you know why." Olivia's face, which was already pale, turned a ghostly white. She knew exactly what Evelyn was talking about. She started to shake her head, a small, desperate gesture of denial. "I believe this will refresh your memory," Evelyn continued, opening her briefcase and pulling out a slim document. She held it out. It was the Gifted Funds and Asset Protection Agreement. "You signed this document 2 years ago, Olivia. Do you remember?" Evelyn's voice was patient, like a teacher guiding a slow student to an inevitable conclusion. "It was on the day your father gave you and your husband a cashier's check for $250,000 to be used as a down payment on your lovely home in the city." She let the number hang in the air. $250,000. I saw some of Damien's friends exchange wide-eyed glances. The scale of my generosity, and their subsequent greed, was being laid bare for all to see. "This document," Evelyn went on, her voice becoming sharper, more clinical, was a standard and very sensible condition of that financial gift. Your father not only gave you that substantial sum, but he also co-signed on your mortgage, taking on significant financial liability for your debt. She looked directly at Damien, now her eyes cold. When a person of means does something like that, Mr. Carter, they take legal steps to protect their own assets from the potential financial irresponsibility of the people they are helping. It's called smart estate planning. She then turned back to Olivia. The agreement you signed is very simple. In it, you acknowledge the receipt of the $250,000, and in consideration for that gift, you willingly, and with full legal understanding, waived any and all future claims to what is legally termed use and occupancy rights of your father's primary residence, which is the property owned by the trust. Evelyn paused. In layman's terms, Olivia, you sold your right to be here. You sold it for $250,000. It was a knockout blow, delivered with surgical precision. The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of the ocean waves outside. The truth, in all its brutal contractual glory, had been revealed. The plan wasn't a spontaneous act of revenge. It was a long-term, carefully constructed consequence. Damien, and Olivia's own greed, their eagerness to take my money without reading the fine print, had been the ink that signed their own eviction notice. Damien looked at Olivia, his face a mask of utter betrayal. You signed this without telling me, he whispered, his voice laced with disbelief. Olivia just stood there, tears welling in her eyes, unable to speak. The foundation of their parasitic partnership had just crumbled into dust. They had been so eager to cash the check, so blinded by the big number, that they had willingly walked into a trap of their own making. I had given them the rope, and they had fashioned their own noose. Evelyn Reed closed her briefcase with a soft, final snap. The sound echoed in the silent room like a judge's gavel. The case was closed. The silence that followed Evelyn Reed's final, devastating sentence was heavier than any I had ever experienced in this house. It was a silence filled with the wreckage of lies and the stark, cold reality of a perfectly executed plan. Damien stood as if he'd been turned to stone, his face a grotesque mask of shock and rage. His friends, the boisterous, arrogant pack who had followed him here, now looked like nervous strangers, their eyes darting between Damien and Evelyn and the door, clearly calculating the fastest route of escape. Olivia had collapsed into a nearby armchair, her body racked with silent, choked sobs. She stared at the document in Evelyn's hand as if it were a venomous snake. Just as Evelyn finished her sentence, as if on a silent, predetermined cue, two large men in simple dark suits stepped through the open front door. They were not police officers, and they weren't thuggish-looking bouncers. They moved with the quiet, imposing confidence of corporate security, the kind of men who protect executives and assets, not break up bar fights. Their presence was a calm, physical manifestation of the new reality. Leo, ever the professional, stepped forward. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "This is our security detail. They are here to ensure a smooth and orderly transition for our new tenants. They will now escort you and your guests while you gather your belongings." This was the final indignity, the last and most humiliating blow. Damien, a man whose entire identity was built on bluster and dominance, was now to be supervised like a naughty schoolboy. He finally snapped out of a stupor, his face contorted in a last, desperate burst of fury. "Escort me! You're not escorting me anywhere!" he roared, taking a step toward Leo. But one of the security men moved with surprising speed, placing himself effortlessly between them. He didn't touch Damien. He didn't have to. He was a wall of calm, immovable muscle. "Sir," the guard said, his voice deep and completely devoid of emotion, "we need you to gather your things now. Please do not make this difficult." His politeness was more intimidating than any threat could ever have been. It communicated that Damien was no longer a factor to be negotiated with. He was simply a task to be completed. His rage was a fire hose directed at a granite wall. It had no effect. He looked around at his friends, his eyes pleading for backup, for someone to join his rebellion. He found no allies. They were already scurrying toward the rooms they had claimed, hastily grabbing their bags, their faces a mixture of fear and embarrassment. They avoided his gaze, their loyalty as shallow as their respect. They were rats, And the ship was not only sinking, it was already at the bottom of the ocean. As the supervised pack-up began, a walk of shame conducted in near silence, my attention turned to Olivia. The chaos of her husband's eviction was just background noise to the quiet, complete collapse happening in the armchair. The architecture of her denial had crumbled to dust, and she was left staring at the wreckage of her own choices. Her tears weren't for the lost vacation or the humiliation. They were tears of profound, soul-crushing realization. I could see it in her eyes as she looked from the signed waiver to her husband, being calmly herded out of the house like livestock, and finally to me. She was seeing the entire timeline in a flash. The $250,000 check she had so eagerly accepted, the legal document she had so carelessly signed, the countless times she had enabled Damien's disrespect, the final, dismissive whatever on the phone. She saw that this wasn't a punishment her father had inflicted upon her. This was a consequence she had earned. She finally looked at me, her face streaked with tears, her voice a broken whisper. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she breathed, the words barely audible. I didn't see." It was the first honest thing she had said in years. Before I could respond, Damien was being herded toward the front door, his arms full of clothes he had hastily ripped from the closet. He stopped in front of Olivia's chair. "Liv, let's go," he demanded, his voice a pathetic attempt at its former authority. "Come on, we're leaving." Olivia didn't move. She just shook her head, burying her face in her hands, her sobs now audible. She wasn't going with him. The spell was broken. She saw him finally for what he was, not a strong, confident man, but a greedy, hollow child. His face fell. In that moment, he lost more than a free vacation. He lost his accomplice, his enabler, his wife. He was alone. The last of his friends' cars roared down the driveway, eager to escape the scene of their leader's downfall. The security guard stood by the door as Damien, defeated, threw his bags into his truck. The loud roar of his truck's engine was the sound of his final, pathetic retreat. He was leaving, and he was leaving alone. After the roar of Damien's truck faded into the distance, a profound quiet settled over the house. It felt as if the building itself was breathing a sigh of relief. Olivia remained in the armchair, her sobs having subsided into a series of quiet, hiccuping breaths. The security men had discreetly vanished. Leo and Evelyn were speaking in low tones by the door, handling the final logistics. I walked over to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and brought it to my daughter. She took it with a trembling hand, her eyes red and swollen, avoiding my gaze. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered again, her voice raw. I sat down in the chair opposite her, not to console her, but to finally speak the truth. "This was never about the house, Olivia," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "This house is just wood and glass and stone. This was about respect. For me, and for the memory of your mother. A memory your husband, and by extension you, treated like it was worthless." She flinched, but she didn't argue. She knew it was true. "I love you, Olivia," I continued. "You are my daughter. But love does not grant you a key to someone's soul. Respect is the price of entry. It is the rent you pay for the space you occupy in another person's life. Your husband paid nothing and expected to own everything. That is not how the world works." I stood up, leaving her with a choice. "My door is always open to you, my daughter," I said, my voice softening. "But you must be the one to walk through it alone, and you must bring with you the respect that you left behind." I then walked away, leaving her to sit with the weight of her future, a future she would now have to build for herself. Later that evening, the house was clean and quiet again. Leo's efficiency was remarkable. The wreckage of the party was gone, leaving no trace. I was on the back patio, the same spot where my ordeal had begun, watching the setting sun paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The storm had passed. I felt a presence beside me and turned to see Mr. Tanaka, who had quietly joined me. We stood in a comfortable silence for a few moments. Two men from different worlds, watching the day end. "It is a beautiful home," he said finally, his voice full of a quiet sincerity. "Your wife, she must have been a woman of great spirit." I looked at the horizon, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time that day. "She was the best," I said. "Everything I did today was to protect what she built here. Not the walls, but the feeling. Mr. Tanaka nodded, a look of deep understanding in his eyes. A house of wood and stone is a simple thing, he said wisely. But a home built from respect and memory, that is the true engineering. He was right, and as the last sliver of the sun disappeared below the ocean, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The chaos was gone. The disrespect had been answered. My wife's legacy was safe. Order, built not with anger, but with foresight and a father's fierce, quiet love, had finally been restored. For years, I believed that maintaining family peace required me to tolerate disrespect in silence. This ordeal taught me a powerful lesson. True peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of clear, unshakable boundaries. An engineer's greatest design isn't a structure of steel and concrete, but a life built on a foundation of self-respect. I didn't act out of vengeance, but from a quiet duty to protect the legacy my wife and I built together. And I learned that sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is to teach a difficult lesson in consequences. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to draw a line like this with family? Tell me what you think. I really want to know.